Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Dibble Institute's August webinar. This is Kay Reed. I am the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's topic, Robust Relationship Skills Education, a strength-based approach to teen dating violence prevention. And I also want to introduce Kathy Guidry, our engineer for today. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Kathy, run this smoothly and answer your questions and run our polls and things. So I just wanted to give a shout out. Over 200 people registered for this webinar, and I want to express my appreciation to the ACT, the ACT Center for Youth Excellence in New York, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, a Healthy Teen Network, the Departments of Health in New Mexico, Ohio, Santa Cruz, and Florida, as well as the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine, where those aren't all the groups that recommended that the people come to this webinar, but those are some of them, and for that we're very grateful. This is a presentation I made at the request of the Violence Prevention Unit of the California Department of Public Health earlier this summer, as they were looking for new and innovative ways to prevent teen dating violence. So I'm happy to do this again. So Kathy, can we go to the webinar information? So a little bit about the webinar. If you're disconnected through your computer, please call in on this 213 number using that access code. If you do get bumped off, it's also in the emails you've gotten from us. We're going to be asking questions in polls and asking you to raise your hands, and we hope you participate with that. And please type your questions into the question box. I am not an expert in dating violence, for sure. I'm pretty knowledgeable about relationship skills, and obviously there's a connection. So I'm hoping this is a good conversation between all of us and a new perspective. When we finish this webinar, it will be archived on our website within a couple of days, and that way you'll be able to pass it along to friends or review it if you want to in the future. So let's start with a show of hands, and Kathy, you can move to the next slide. Who is new? For whom is this your first Dibble webinar? How many of you are new? If you would raise your hands, please. Who's new to Dibble webinars? Waiting for the results to come in. It looks like maybe 20% of you are new to Dibble webinars. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And for those of you who are returning, we welcome you as well. This has been a really important way that we complete our mission, is able to do this kind of educational programming. So on the screen in front of you are two of my favorite people. These are Helen and Charlie Dibble. Charlie founded the Dibble Institute over 20 years ago. He saw how young people's love lives were tripping them up in helping them achieve the goals they wanted. There's a much longer story, and I'm happy to go into it at a different time, but suffice to say, Charlie was a forward-thinking visionary. He talked to the researchers of the time who were doing research into family life and relationships, and he found out they were discovering a lot about what made for successful, long-lasting relationships and marriages. But when asked how they would translate this to youth, these well-renowned researchers would kind of shrug their shoulders and say that's really hard. So what Charlie thought about and made a very wise decision is he pointed us in this direction of taking research and translating it into teaching tools. Kathy, the next slide. That we make then available to others who go out and do this good work. So the Dibble Institute today is a national independent nonprofit. We equip young people with the skills and knowledge they need to lead healthy romantic lives now and in the future. We do that by, as I said, by translating research into practice. And while we're not direct service providers, over the past 10 years, with people like you, doing the good work out in the field, we estimate conservatively that 1.5 million young people have been exposed to a Dibble program and getting smart about their love lives. So we're really thrilled about that, and we welcome you to our team, because we're all on the same team to increase and better outcomes for kids. So a little bit more about Dibble, our core values. Kathy, we believe in research. There's nobody behind the screen. There's not a religious ideology. There's not a political ideology. Instead, we count and rely on research, and we go where the research leads us, which means that on occasion we have changed the direction of our materials because we know more and our understandings become more nuanced. So that's where we really ground ourselves, is in research. Our programs are research-based. All of them are certainly evidence-informed. Some of them are evidence-based, and as often as we can, we evaluate them. The Dibble Institute also believes, Kathy, in strong and stable and healthy families. We are in this business primarily because children's outcomes are better, and you can look on the CDC website, you can look on find lots of evidence about this, that children raised by their own biological or adopted parents in general fare better than those who don't. Not that there aren't exceptions, not that there aren't some kids, and we have a president that proves the rule, but in general, being raised by your own biological parents or your own adopted parents is the best place for kids. Now, that said, we're not anti-divorce, we're not anti-families breaking up, especially if they are high-conflict families, or if there's people in the families who are abusing self or others or substances. So kids don't do better to stay together for the kids if there's plates flying or if there's abuse in the household. So we aren't stay together at all costs. And also, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude for the many, many single parents who every day are putting one foot in front of the other and doing really good work with their kids. They just are heroes. And even many of them, not all of them, but many of them would tell you that it's hard to raise kids on your own. It's hard physically, it's hard financially, it's hard emotionally. And if they had it to do over again, they might have made different choices. So we again salute the countless single parents that are doing a great job, but even they would probably wish they could have been different. And finally, we believe, Kathy, that all people deserve to be treated with respect. There's not been one time I've been out making a public presentation where someone says, well, how do we handle the gay and lesbian youth in our midst? And this is it. It's very simple. All people, all young people need to be treated with respect, and all relationships can be made better with relationship skills. So, for instance, we, in most cases, don't presume the gender of your partner when we're developing programs. We believe that if you have a scenario that says you and your girlfriend are doing this activity, we don't specify who you is. You could be a boy or you could be a girl. We also have scenarios that are specifically designed for gay and lesbian youth because they have unique circumstances. So, for instance, if you have a scenario that says, my girlfriend really wants to have sex and I'm just not ready yet, but she says we're lesbians, we can't get pregnant, so we should go ahead, but I'm just not ready. Is that smart or not? What would you do? So there's special circumstances that we realize that sexual minority youth have, and we want to address those. So we want really to broaden the circle as much as we can. Our programs are culturally competent because young people are bringing their own family values, their own cultural values as and designing their idea of their life and where they want to go. So we've seen good results in both populations of GLBTQ youth and then youth from all different kinds of cultures. So, Kathy, can you throw up the first poll, please? I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on how important is prevention work in the dating violence world to you. So those of you who are on the call, tell me how important you think prevention work is in dating violence. Take a few seconds here. Okay, wow. So 95, okay, I admit I kind of skewed it. Very important or important. So 100% of you think it's either very important or important. And, I think that is so smart, because what's unique about working with youth populations in teen dating violence and doing teen dating violence prevention is that you can really go upstream. You can really, so Kathy, you want to go back to the slide? You don't know if these young people, they may or may not be in a relationship. That relationship may or may not be healthy. So it really gives us a chance to do tremendous prevention work when we work with young people. So we all want a world, right? I mean, that's why we're coming here today. It's why you get up every morning, you do the work you do. We all want people, and young people especially, to live without violence, Kathy. But, way too many, it's just too common. It's not a day goes by that you don't hear some horrible story in the news, and you just think, especially in some very vulnerable communities, violence is just way too common. But violence happens across all kinds of relationships. And what's unique, Kathy, the next slide, what's unique about young people is because they're inexperienced, and I mean no harm to these two people that look a little creepy to me, but young people, they aren't experienced. They don't know some of the danger signs. They don't know what to look for. They don't know how to evaluate from afar. So they can get caught up in things before they actually know what's going on. And what we want to do, Kathy, the next slide is, we not only want a world where there's no violence, but we want to help prevent that, right? 100% of you said that that's what you wanted to prevent. So today, Kathy, I would like to make the case for you to try something new in your dating violence programs, a new innovative approach, which is robust relationship skills education, which is really asset-based, strength-based, and very empowering for young people. So here's another couple of polls. Think about the young people that you serve, and you might be a senior advisor at a state level, you might be on the ground, but just hypothetically, do the young people you serve have romantic relationships? How many of them have love lives? And we aren't asking, but tell us, do the young people you serve have romantic relationships? Yeah, pretty much all of you, 98% said they do, 2% said no. And, that makes lots of sense, because when I looked at the registrants yesterday coming into this webinar, most of you are serving 15 to 18-year-olds. Some of you are serving 12 to 14-year-olds. A smaller group is serving 19 to 24-year-olds. And so when you think about that mix, we're developmentally moving away from peers, or, supplementing peers with a romantic attraction. So this is a common developmental stage of life, right? It happens, most people have this. So Kathy, the next slide, please. Because my question is, how many of you we're getting there. How many of you have seen your young people derail? Kathy can have the other one. How many of you have seen those romantic relationships derail young people from accomplishing their goals? How many of you have seen romantic relationships turn violent, or someone gets pregnant unexpectedly? Yeah. So not only are young people having romantic relationships, but when they go south, they can have tremendous implications for young people. So that's that's kind of the soup we're swimming in. This is a normal phenomenon, and it can also be kind of either dangerous or, at the very least, derail people. So thank you, Kathy. So I'd like to, let's get to the heart of this matter. And I'm going to kind of divide this talk into threes. We're going to start at 40,000 feet, talking about what is teen dating violence, a little bit more about relationship education and what the research says, and then looking at a new perspective, then coming down a little bit more and looking under the hood and what are the key concepts in romantic relationship skills education that you can teach, because lots of people don't realize that you can really teach young people about love lives and do it quite effectively. And then lastly, we'll look at the two Dibble evidence-based programs. I know that many of you were very interested in that aspect, and we'll spend some time on that. So that's the plan for today. So let's go, Kathy, to the next slide. Dating violence is just not physical. I know you guys probably could give this talk at this point better than I. It's not just physical. Sexual, emotional, psychological, financial, there's sexual coercion. And frankly, even though we're not directly addressing other forms of violence today, you understand that there's rape, there's sexual assault, there's general youth violence. And what we're starting to see in the field is that when you teach young people these skills around their love lives, they can generalize the skills they learn to help prevent violence in a dating situation to be similar to the skills they need to avoid violence in other situations. So it's good to know when you're working with schools who have limited time, and instead of saying, well, this week we'll do dating violence, next week we'll do sexual assault, and the week after that we'll do, something else. You have a nice multi-pronged package here when you focus on relationship education. So in the next slide, we'll see that just last year, the CDC, 1 in 10 boys and 1 in 5 girls experienced physical or sexual dating violence in the last year, and that's huge. So if you just think in your head of line up 10 kids in front of you, if it's a boy, one will be. If it's a group of boys, one will be have had some sexual assault. If it's girls, there'll be 2. So it's way too many people. And what's interesting in the youthful population is that it's mutual. It's often mutual abuse. So with adults, it's more. I know both genders do it, but in adults, it tends to be more males. In youth violence, it tends to be both, sadly equally split. And current interventions based on my research, and this isn't just, no disrespect here, they're doing important work. So Kathy, the next slide, focus on really learning how violence is expressed and looking at gender norms, looking at violence norms. And, this is all really important, but it's not as robust and as protective as it could be. And here's why I say that. One of our authors, Marlene Pearson, who teaches at a technical trade school, community college in Madison, Wisconsin, tells the story that when she used to teach the power and control wheel and talk about that with students, she didn't get nearly as many restraining orders as she did when she taught robust romantic relationship skills. And the reason she hypothesizes is when you say to a young person, well, this is what's bad, this is what's dangerous, they'll say, well, that's not me, I'm not that bad. But when you say, here's what good looks like, here's what healthy looks like, they say, oh, I don't have that either. So we think this is actually a quite positive development for the field, and we'll get better results in terms of keeping people safe. So the next slide is a chart. I want to shout out to Dixie, one of my colleagues, for bringing this to us. This comes from Veto Violence and the CDC. And what's interesting about this slide is that it shows how it all fits together, right? So individual building skills with school programs to choose nonviolent, safe behaviors. That's what relationship education does. Also, under relationships, build and maintain positive relationships between young people, caregivers, and local adults. That's what relationship education does. And then the other good work that teen dating violence group do in terms of changing the norms and working in, and on creating safe spaces and safe environments? That's all important. So this isn't an either or, this is an and with situation. So we're all on the same team. Kathy, so when I was preparing for this a few months ago, I realized, and this is a little bit of a sidebar, that relationship skills not only have the capacity to address teen dating violence prevention, it also has the possibility of mitigating the results of teen dating violence. And here's what I mean. So the next slide shows that this is a list of the consequences to victims of teen dating violence in terms of what they're more at risk for through the rest of their lives. And this is why it's so important, the work that is being done in the world of dating violence. So risky sexual behaviors, ongoing violence, living in poverty, depression, social and academic difficulties. This is a pretty daunting list. And then the next slide is I culled from the research of relationship education what it positively impacts. So the research is very clear that violence is reduced, that sexual activity changes and is delayed, that beliefs around parenting means young people understand more about how to be a better parent and what and how their love lives impact their parenting. Increases self-awareness, self-discipline, sexual pressure. They're able to withstand that. They're able to lower negative behaviors at home and at school and improve communication with parents. So if you put those two, I'm sorry I don't have this slide, but when you put those two side by side, you start to see that the risks that you come with being a victim of dating violence and the benefits of relationship education clearly have strong overlap. So I just think it's interesting to think about. But today, so Kathy, the next slide is really about changing focus, right? So when you look at this, this little cartoon figure, how many of you can do a little show of hands here, how many of you see the person standing facing the right, facing into the darkness? You see the little person with the anorak and facing into the darkness? How many of you can see that? Okay, so squint again and see that there's the darkness, and then there's a hood, and there's a hand to the right, and an elbow, and two little feet. About 18% of you can see that. Okay, so then let's clear that out, Kathy, and let's look the other way. How many people can see the person in profile looking to the left? Right? There's a nose and an eye and a mouth, and the hair is dark. Right? So can you see that? So we're looking at the same picture, but we're looking at two different images depending on how we orient ourselves. So when I was thinking about this, that's what I was thinking about. Teen dating violence. So when you look, and so Kathy, the next one, we're asking you to move from a reactive look at young people to a proactive look. Again, lots of these young people aren't even in relationships yet. They're too young. They haven't started. They might be having those initial, have just gotten past the idea that boys or girls have cooties, but we can really move upstream to reach them. And then the other way to shift focus, Kathy, the next slide, is to go from an intervention when something bad has happened to a prevention before anything bad has happened, or a secondary prevention. Because, if you've been had a violent occurrence in your life, what is to prevent you from having that repeat? So this classroom on the right is a group in Kokomo, Indiana. It's in these FACS teachers on the call. This is a FACS classroom. It stands for Family and Consumer Sciences, where they're doing prevention, primary and secondary prevention. And then lastly, in the last slide, is we're going from, countering negative pathologies, like working in that reactive intervention place, to actually building positive, healthy assets. And what's and you're really empowering youth, right? We're giving them the tools that they need to make really good decisions moving forward. So on to the next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit more about empowering. Just last month and in our newsletter, and by the way, by virtue of you being on this call, we will enroll you all in the Dibble monthly newsletter, where I try to keep you, I edit it, I try to keep people up to date on research and tools and funding and all the important stuff in our lives. But today I've downloaded for you as one of the handouts something called the SC, let me look at it, the SV Prevention Technical Package, which is from the CDC about preventing sexual violence. And one of its key points is what's called empowerment education. And it really is about giving young people these tools to assess relationships, to know themselves, to make good decisions, you know, and so that's there for you to use. But I think it's really important that we think about what we're doing in relationship education as part of that empowerment package. So, Kathy, the next slide. What we've learned through our research over the years is that when you teach young people healthy relationship skills, you're also giving them the tools for emotional management and for greater agency and self-efficacy for around their relationships. And we'll unpack that a little bit. Kathy, the next slide. So we're helping them with self-reflection, helping them look at their own goals. This is actually a personality profile we give young people, or it's part of our programming, that helps understand their personalities in relationships. Their family background, it's what makes our programs trauma informed, is, you know, really thinking about what baggage do you have? What do you want to repeat? And this isn't shaming, this is just saying, and what do you want to keep, you want to leave behind, and again, empowering, and really thinking about their future. And of course, we have to, you know, relationship skills aren't the only thing people need to learn. You know, they need education, they need health care, they need housing, they need they need comprehensive sex education, they need, you know, they need everything else. But they also need to think about their future and their relationships of the future. So we're trying to give them the tools for that. The next thing they learn, Kathy, is that they have choices, right? That relationships just don't have to happen to you. You don't have to respond automatically. And the best illustration I have of this is one of our programs was taught up in Sacramento, California, and to a young mother. And later she reported to her instructor that she had been at a bus stop. A guy drove by slowly and said, "Hey, baby, what's your phone?" And she said, "Before I took this class, I would have gotten in the car with him. But now I understand that he doesn't know my name and he doesn't know anything about me." And so she said, "Move along. You know, I don't, thanks, but no thanks." So how huge is that? What cascade of bad things in her life and in her child's life did that perhaps prevent? You know, I can go on and on, but you see the point. She learned she had a choice, and she didn't just have to automatically get into the car. Okay, Kathy, next. So I see some of you are writing in questions, and I appreciate that. We'll get to those at the end of the chat. So please keep those coming, but don't feel like you're forgotten. We'll get to those. Young people, in terms of their brain development, and I know this won't come as a shock to anybody on this call, but you know, they're not fully formed human beings yet in terms of their adult brains being in place where they can do better emotional regulation. So what we're trying to do in relationship education is help build those pro-social skills, that social and emotional management. So they learn to take a time out. They learn to take a deep breath. They learn to, you know, say, "I'll be back in 30 minutes and let's talk about it then." So we really try to give them the tools they need. Because sometimes violence is arguments that get physical, and this is a way to stop that from happening. So the next one. Now, lots of times people say to me, well, these young people these days, they're just into hooking up, long-term committed relationships. Gosh, that's so old-fashioned. That's not what these kids want. And actually, if you Google University of Minnesota Monitoring the Future, they do a great study every year. It's a huge. They use it. They find a nationally representative sample of young people in their senior year in high school, and they ask them a ton of questions, and it's primarily around drug use. But they do ask some questions around family life. And consistently, for 3 decades, over the last 30 plus years, they've asked the question, how important is a marriage and good family life to you? And reliably, girls in the 80-ish%, might be at 79, might be at 81, and guys in the 70-ish%, so 69 to 72 over 3 decades, has said that a good family and marriage is either important or very important to them. Now, so there's 20% of girls and 30% of guys to whom that's not so important, and that's fine. But what is encouraging to me is when we help young people establish high expectations to look for a North Star, which is what the slide is about, we empower them to find and create the relationships they want, right? We're not imposing this on them. Time and again, they tell us this. And that even holds true for young people vulnerable young people, inner city youth. When asked, there was a great report done by Child Trends where they asked young people, how many of you want, in the long run, a long-lasting monogamous relationship and family? And again, similar, majority of young people did. And they asked them, do you think you can achieve that? And they said no. And they asked why. And the answer was, we don't know how. We're not being taught the skills. So really helping them address this is an important part of relationship education. Kathy, the next slide. So one thing we help young people understand is, or address, is faulty relationship beliefs, right? Like what are reasonable and unreasonable expectations for relationships. And this darling couple comes to us from a program down in Georgia. And so when we look at it, we think, well, what could be a reasonable or unreasonable expectation here, right? So is it, if that young lady thought, well, every time I see my boyfriend, he's going to be in a tux and hand me flowers, is that reasonable or unreasonable? So we're helping young people, and of course there's a zillion questions like that. Everybody comes with their own expectations. There's no expectation that's necessarily right or wrong, but just what's right or wrong for you. Obviously we have expectations around, really clear ones around violence, but there's others that are dependent, again, on your culture and your life. But so helping young people to really identify what their expectations are and find that out in a potential partner is important. They also start learning, and Kathy, the next slide, again, how to decide about their relationships and not just slide into their relationships. All too often it's easy to say, well, we'll just take this little step, and then, I'm going to, move in my, like living together, like I'm going to move in my toothbrush, and then I'm going to move in my jammies, and then I'm going to move in my slippers, and, pretty soon we've bought a dog and have a cell phone plan in common. And these are all things where they haven't really had a discussion about what does the future hold for us? What do we expect from each other? And again, there's no right or wrong answers, but it's important to be on the same page. And lastly, and I think this is also speaks to the good work people do in teen dating violence prevention, is to really start helping people understand a low-risk approach to relationships. And what do I mean by that? So in our programs, we have an exercise where you have young people, like on little Post-it notes, talk about what are parts of a good and healthy relationship. And so you get trust, fun, and communication, and reliance, and all kinds of things. And then you have them put them on a pyramid like this. So you're actually helping them plan and pace their relationships, like what goes first and what goes second. And I see some very interesting discussions around, like, where do you put trust? Where does trust belong? And some people say, well, trust is a starter. And you think, well, is it really trust? Is trust really a starter? Because if you trust too soon without knowing a person, I'm not saying being distrustful, but isn't trust like up a little higher, maybe at the end of positive starters and before deepening of the relationship? Don't you need to kind of know somebody? And this actually speaks, I think, to the emerging world of trafficking. Of course, there's some trafficking where, young people are drugged and, they're obviously crazy and bad. But there also are occasions where people get into trafficking because they trusted too soon. They didn't watch. They weren't aware. They didn't, and this isn't to blame the victim. This is to empower young people to make good choices. So anyway, we look at a low-risk approach. So you pace and plan your relationships. And finally, let's talk about the nut that is the teen dating violence part and how to actually avoid unsafe situations, right? We think, if you got to kids soon enough, you'd be able to say, well, if you see someone, they would figure out that if I see somebody at my school and they're kicking a dog, I'd report them, or I wouldn't want to be their friend if they're being violent like that. So you can actually do very, very early interventions where people can just say, I don't need to be around that guy. So let's look a little bit more under this hood. They learn to spot, Kathy, the next slide, we teach them to spot red flags. And red flags, what's interesting about red flags is sometimes it's very obviously a red flag. And sometimes the answer is it depends. And helping young people with that kind of plastic thinking, that kind of flexible thinking is helpful. So for instance, if, my significant other says, you're looking a little chubby today, is that abuse, potential abuse, disrespect, or is that him being concerned about, in a loving way about my health? And so that's one of those where it's, tone and intonation and context, those are all important. And so we try to help young people really understand that and get a better grasp of some of the nuances there. We also help them see that, while this sounds extreme, you could imagine that every act of murder that's done in a romantic or a dating situation started with some level of disrespect. And so we're really trying to help young people draw that line of disrespect, or of respect, that if you see the first sign of disrespect, you stop it, you address it, you use your communication skills, and you don't let it go further down the road. I mean, the great thing about working with young people is, it's, if they haven't gotten, too enmeshed with someone, they can, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second thing we talk to them about in terms of avoiding bad things, and Kathy, the next slide, is, what relief you give young people when you tell them about how dopamine works and what their brain looks like when they're in love. So what we know from the science is when you're in love and your feet can't touch the floor, your head is in the clouds, and you can't think of anything but him or her, that's your brain on drugs. And it's like these fireworks. It's exciting and it's fun, but it can cloud your thinking. And so we suggest to young people that you enjoy that. Live it up, have a great time, puppy love, infatuation, it's fabulous, but don't do anything life-altering during those 6 months, 6 to 9 months, because in 6 to 9 months, as the dopamine starts to clear out of your system, you start to see people more clearly. And you may decide, you just aren't that into this person. I mean, it may not even be about violence. You might just decide, he's a nice person, like him or her, but, not for me. Or you could say, I'm not being treated very well. So, to really enjoy yourself, but not to get enmeshed in such a way that extracting yourself would be too difficult. And then lastly, we talk about 2 different kinds of violent behaviors. there's as I mentioned earlier, arguments that get physical, and then there's the creepy, stalky, coercive kind of violence. And they're both bad, but they both have different responses. So to the arguments that get physical, it is possible that people who have that as an issue can get help, can learn communication skills, can get better. I'm not saying you have to stick with that person. If you're 17 and you have a boyfriend or girlfriend who's getting to, has lots of arguments that get physical, there's no reason to stick around, frankly. But those people can be helped. The second kind of relationship that gets sticky is when you have one of these emotionally controlling, coercive, stalky types. And that is pathological and often requires police action. So it's important that young people understand the difference and how to address them how to address each one appropriately. And let me just put in a plug for, it's really helpful if you can train the teachers who are actually working with the youth, because you might have, gone in for the class and taught young people for however long the program lasts. But if you haven't left somebody on the ground to help young people, then when these issues come up, it's harder for them. So I'm a big fan of training teachers in the field, along, if that's your design, along with your staff, just so we leave people with some good tools and good resources when you leave. So let's then turn a little more to what actually is in relationship education. Lots of times when I talk about it, I can just see like the cartoon bubble coming out of their head, and it says, well, it's kind of fluffy, and what's really there. But so we're going to go into what we know about the evidence and what we know about the logic model. So, Kathy, the next slide. Relationship education is based on a cognitive behavioral model that thought that. Yeah, and so let's look at the next one, that attitudes and beliefs can impact intentions and behaviors. We know that relationships are skill-based, and so we're teaching skills and knowledge and attitudes and behaviors that will make changes. And sometimes, as this slide says, you may not, as we said before, young people may or may not be in relationships. But if you teach them the attitude and beliefs, that will impact their future behaviors. And we've seen this time and again in the studies we've done. You can get smart about your love lives. It's not just moonbeams and fairy dust, while that's important, but we can really teach skills. And this is what's new, is knowing that there's actually a new tool in the toolkit. And here are some of the core messages. Really a key one is, after the next slide, building motivation and empathy by seeing through the eyes of a child. We're really harnessing the power of family, the power of future children to change behavior. And think about, if you asked your young people, what happens to children when there's violence in the home? Or what happens to children when there's turbulence in the home, relationship turbulence in the homes? 60% of all child abuse happens when there's a non-related male in the house. You can Google bad things daddies do, and you can Google bad things boyfriends do, and you will see an exponential difference in those responses. So these young people that you're working with will not be surprised. They will often have their own stories, and this again is part of the trauma-informed approach. We acknowledge those stories, and the other thing, those young people, they want it to be different for their children. They're very, very motivated. So when we help them see how their love lives look through the eyes of their children, we know that the young people start to make different choices about their love lives. Kathy, the next slide, because this is really key. Your love life is not neutral. How you set up your love life impacts the rest of your life, right? So if you are young, you're in love, and you get pregnant in high school. Not that there aren't plenty of people who've done amazing and remarkable things with those set of circumstances, but there's more who have not, right? So we are helping young people recognize it, and even us adults recognize that we should address matters of the heart and of romance because, as we saw earlier when we did the poll at the beginning of this webinar, so many young people can get derailed by how they set up their love life. It's not something we should take for granted. Kathy, the next slide. The other thing we know about relationship education, and Dibble has demonstrated this time and again around the country, is that interventions, can be implemented with both genders at the same time, one gender at a time, young people, LGBTQ youth, all kinds of young people, all kinds of ages. The age span that's here on this conference call, 12 to 25, certainly is in the age range that you can address this with, and in a large number of settings. So this actually is a photo of a group of Youth Build students down in Los Angeles we worked with. We've seen this used in corrections, in reentry, family reunification is huge, with pregnant and parenting teens, in school classes, health and psychology, home ec or family and consumer sciences, and many, many more. You can, on our website, we have a list of case studies. There's being used with sexual offenders in jails in Utah, and all kinds of interesting things. So we have a lot of data on how to implement these classes, and nothing gives myself or other Dibble staff more pleasure than to chat with people and problem solve with you about how to get it into your setting. So you're part of our team, and of course we're part of yours. To move on, Kathy, to the next slide, what's really good about the relationship skills approach is young people tend to respond more to positive messages than to negative ones. So this isn't a scared straight, this isn't a dare kind of thing. We're saying, we know, you've told us what you want, told us what you aspire to, and we're going to help you get that in a positive way. Relationship education, Kathy, the next slide, is not stigmatizing. I mean, kids want to learn about their love lives. It will come as a shock to you, I'm sure, she says sarcastically. But what are they texting about? It's not, the Battle of Little Bighorn or quadratic equations. They're texting about, who loves who's in, they're just texting about their relational lives. Now, this is a group of kids down in Georgia who use relationship skills as part of a leadership program. So it's something that they're drawn to. Kathy, the next slide. And when we think about that early chart from the CDC about the levels of personal and societal, ramifications, well, what they found is that when you have positive experiences in groups, it can change social norms. And we see that in our research, that when you help young people get smart about their love lives, they start to move that information and those practices, practice them not just in their love lives, but with their friends and their peers and their families. And lastly, Kathy, that we can help young people learn alternative conflict resolution strategies. And don't we need that today, right? So instead of like me punching you out, we can sit down and talk about it. I can have taken a time out. There's all kinds of good things to do. So to the last part, let's talk a little bit about the two Dibble programs that are evidence-based in this area. The first is Relationship Smarts Plus. That's the lower right cover. It is on the NREP list of evidence-based programs and practices. It meets school standards for health and sex education, positive youth development, family and consumer sciences. And it's really appropriate for middle school and high school youth, although it's been, people adapt it all around. And speaking about adaptations, Love Notes is its adaptation. It is for an older, grittier audience, may I say, and it assumes you've been sexually active. You don't have to be, but, and probably parenting. So it's the same content, but really speaking more to the lifestyle and the life experience of more vulnerable youth. So then the next one, Kathy. So as I said, Relationship Smarts Plus is on the NREP list. If you Google NREP, N-R-E-P-P, and Relationship Smarts Plus, you'll get to that page and see all the research. It was evaluated over 5 years at Auburn University with about 8,000 high school students, and their findings were very significant in the area of violence reduction. And here's some of the content, and let me just say that in that, the handouts, one of them is a sample lesson. It's one of the great lessons. It's there, it's in entirety, and it's about using sculpture as a way for young people to compare and contrast healthy and unhealthy relationships. So that's yours with our compliments. But here's another one where we lay out principles for smart relationships, and you can do this laying them out. You could process kids. There's all kinds of ways to get to this list. But once you get to this list, then we provide them with scenarios like my boyfriend, likes football, and I like concert pianos and concerts and chamber music, and he won't ever come to my, he won't ever come to a concert with me, and all he wants to do is go to football. Is that? And I think that's what I'll do. I think I'll give up my piano, love the piano, and I think I'll go to all the football games. And so, what does that reflect? Well, that's probably number 4, don't change yourself. And then don't be phony. And so, you help young people kind of put this tip sheet in their brain that they can compare and contrast, get guidelines. And you can see in the next slide, as a class, you can have really vibrant class discussions. Is that smart or not so smart? And so on. So that's a real practical way to bring some of these things that I've been talking about to life, where you start to educate young people. Another thing, Kathy, the next slide, is we really work on communications and other skills, and certainly speaker listener, where there's one, to be the Indian talking stick, where one person's talking and the other person is listening attentively and then rephrasing and, going back and forth one at a time. And while it's very unnatural, it's also helpful. And, certainly this is a tip for those of you who work in offices. It's a good time when someone says to you, I'd like you to do the following, is to stop and say, let me make sure I have that clear. You want me to do this and this and this. And so it's a skill we all can use. But we also go beyond that, working on how to complain effectively, how to explore expectations, how to look at issues that are under the surface. So those are all part of communication. And then this part, staying together or breaking up, we never talk to kids about breaking up. And you might break up because it's dangerous or violent, or you might just break up because, he likes football, you like classic music, and, no harm, no foul. So we work on some scenarios where you might want to break up, and also tips for how to break up. And frankly, one of them, I know this sounds hilarious, but one of the most positive and fun units of Relationship Smarts Plus is where you have the kids bring in sad breakup music, and you talk about getting over a broken heart, and it's all, really, it's actually kind of quite humorous and fun after they kind of get through the songs and all. So it's a skill that we teach too infrequently. So to wrap up, we want to abuse and promote healthy nonviolent behaviors. We're just all over that. And so before I go to the last slide, I'd like another thumbs up, thumbs down. So how many of you believe that you can start implementing this innovative approach to teen dating violence, some small thing in the world that you work in? Let's have did we equip you with the skills you needed to move out and get some? And if you didn't, let's see, well, no, we're coming in, we're going. So if there's something else that you would if you need from us, or like, well, we'll talk about how to contact us, because we really think this is an important work that you do, and that we'd love to be part of the team. So as I said, I was making the case today that we can prevent dating abuse by including evidence-based relationship skills programming as a strength-based approach to preventing teen dating violence. Kathy, the next slide. Okay, so let's get to your questions. Kathy, that's the next slide. Let me look here. That's a good question. So Lisa asked, how can gender violence be equal when girls are twice as likely to be victims? That's a good question, and I thought of that as I was saying that out loud today. Let me look into that. I was wondering if it was because guys, well, I don't know. I mean, are guys more apt to do it more frequently? So let me ask. That's a very good question, and I will, unless somebody there knows the answer to that. Okay, any other questions about Dibble, about relationship skills education, about teen dating violence, any other things we can help you with here? Okay, so Kathy, the next slide. So we'd like to make available for you today a 30-day review copy. All of our programs are available in print and also online in a digital format. And we're happy to send you a review copy for 30 days. So please either email me directly, or Kathy can be reached at that 800 number. Love to have you take a look, because you do want to take you want to make sure you know what you're getting. So Kathy, the next slide. I also want to note that we're doing a Love Notes training in Columbus, Ohio in a couple of weeks. So if you're at all interested, you can call Kathy at that 800 number for more information, or register here. It's also on our website, dibbleinstitute.org. So we'd love to have you join us. And then, Kathy, the next slide. And speaking of that, thank you for coming today. We're going to be sending you a survey, and it really does help us make our webinars better. So please, we do appreciate it. It just has 3 questions on it. And we will be archiving this webinar on our website. And finally, for next month, we're going to have a best of webinar. Our most popular webinar from our archives was on teen technology and social media by Dr. Myers at the University of North Carolina. So please join us next month for this very important topic. And so thank you very much. I appreciate your coming and your attention, and please let us know how we can be helpful to you, and thank you for your good work. Thank you.